The 2023 CONCACAF Gold Cup starts this week, and heading into this edition of CONCACAF's premier continental championship, Canada has once again released their 23-man roster. Now, coming out of a Nations League where we knew that the Nations League squad was going to be a bit stronger than the Gold Cup squad, Canada today drops their Gold Cup roster, and it is missing quite a few notable players. However, it's not as steep of a drop-off as I think people were expecting. In the end, it's just Team Canada minus Alphonso Davies, Jonathan David, Kyle Larin, Ishmael Kone, and Tajon Buchanan, which is most of the offense, but we'll talk about that later. A semi-rotated Gold Cup squad, but some of the big boys still came to play, notably guys like Steven Eustáquio, Steven Vittoria, and Milan Borjan. So some of the main starters still are around and kicking, and so we're going to break down this Canada Gold Cup roster. Now, how we do this is we look at how many players come from MLS, how many players come from international places, and where internationally do they play, and that kind of gives us a gauge of the level of talent of this Canada team based off of the leagues and places that are represented by Team Canada. So to start things off at the baseline, there are 10 players coming from Major League Soccer and 13 players coming from abroad. Looking at the Canada MLS players, of the 10 MLS players, usually in the past, when Team Canada has MLS players, there is a massive bias towards the Canadian MLS teams. That makes sense. Canadian MLS teams don't count Canadians as international players in MLS, unlike the American teams which do, which means that typically the level of player that's Canadian who plays on a Canadian MLS team on average is a bit lower than the Canadian MLS player who plays on an American MLS team. This time, we have, of the 10 Canadian MLS players, 4 of them play on Canadian teams and 6, the majority, play in America. 4 MLS players playing in Canada being Toronto FC's Jonathan Osorio and Rishi Larea, the Vancouver Whitecaps' Ali Ahmed, and CF Montreal's Zachary Brault-Guillard. First Canada call-up notably for Ali Ahmed. Promising young midfielder, he should be a welcome addition to the squad. Of the 6 American-based MLS players, we start off with Dane St. Clair, the goalkeeper for Minnesota United. No surprises there. He's pretty much a regular in the Canada national team squad. Joining him out of the Colorado Rapids is Moise Bombito. Bombito is a 23-year-old center back. He got his first call-up to Canada for the Nations League finals. However, he didn't play. He continues to come into the Gold Cup. I'd imagine that he might get some minutes here. Joining Bombito as a center back is Zach McGraw, a 26-year-old center back from the Portland Timbers. McGraw is an interesting one, as at 26, he's getting his first ever international call-up, and also a name that Canadian fans aren't really familiar with. He hasn't really been on the radar for Team Canada. He is a American born and raised in the USA, although he has a Canadian mother, which makes him eligible for the Canadian national team, and it looks like now at the age of 26, he's just decided to commit to Canada after probably realizing that he's not going to get a shot to play for the US and has a shot to play for Canada at this Gold Cup. So Zach McGraw is added to the Canadian roster. We also have Kamal Miller, a regular for Inter Miami, and joining the team up front, one first-time call-up in Jason Russell Rowe, who is a young striker for the Columbus Crew. He was the 2022 MLS Next Pro Golden Boot winner and MVP in that league, and turned an incredible MLS Next Pro season with Columbus Crew 2 into a full-time contract and full-time season this year in MLS with the Columbus Crew, which he has played quite well and now gets the national team call-up. And Jacob Schaffelberg, the Nashville SC man, who has been absolutely fantastic this season with Nashville after being traded from Toronto FC full-time in the off-season. So with 6 guys in the US and 4 guys in Canada, we are getting now to the point where the Canadian MLS call-ups are quality call-ups in Major League Soccer. It didn't always used to be like this. We used to regularly have a huge load of guys from the Canadian MLS teams, a lot of younger guys who would not crack MLS taking up an international player spot. Now we get more guys who are playing on US teams, and for US teams to take Canadians, I mean, some of these guys like Zach McGraw are domestic players in the US, but for the most part, for American teams to take on Canadian players, it's a bit more of a risk, so they want their Canadian players to be a bit better, and just generally Canadian players on American teams on average are a bit better. So the fact that we're getting to the point where like more MLS guys on the Canadian national team are playing for US-based teams than Canadian-based teams means that we're getting like the top-end guys from the Canadian teams and just the top-end guys from around MLS as a whole. And we've reached the point where now being a regular impact draft starter in MLS is the bare minimum to be anywhere near a Canada team, rather than like 5-6 years ago when if you were a starter at all in MLS, you were in the team automatically. Moving on to the international side of things. 13 players away internationally. One of them not in Europe. One is Lucas Cavallini, who is in Mexico, and 12 others who are based out of Europe, distributed as such. A lot of things going on here because 13 teams being represented in 10 different countries abroad. So, starting off in England, we have 2 players. Tom McGill is the first, the Brighton and Hove Albion goalkeeper. He is technically with Brighton and Hove Albion in the English Premier League. However, he's never played in the Premier League for Brighton. He's been on the bench a couple of times, but he's played more so in this past season in the Premier League 2 with their under-23 side. Joining him from England is Junior Hoilett, and now the asterisk next to England's 2 is to mark off Junior Hoilett. Hoilett has spent the last 2 seasons with Reading in the English Championship. However, this past season, Reading was just relegated from the English Championship to English League 1, and Junior Hoilett was on a 1-year contract and has not re-signed yet with the team. And so Hoilett is leaving Reading and as of right now is unattached for the upcoming season. So most recently he was playing in England, and he's played in England basically his whole career, so I don't see why he would leave unless he was thinking about retiring. And so I'd assume Hoilett's going to stay in England, and for our purposes right now we can count Hoilett as a player coming from the English leagues. Germany, similar situation. Scott Kennedy was the only player that Canada has on this roster playing in Germany. Of course, Alphonso Davies plays for Bayern Munich in the Bundesliga, but he is not on the Gold Cup roster. Scott Kennedy spent this past season in the German Bundesliga 2. However, his team was just relegated at the conclusion of this season, and he will not be returning for the 2023-2024 season in the 3 Liga. So Scott Kennedy is a free agent, and again, for our purposes, he was playing in the German system before this, but don't be surprised if Scott Kennedy is no longer in Germany at the start of the next season. Mexico, as we already said, the only non-European country represented that's not MLS. Lucas Cavallini plays in that league for Tijuana right now. Moving on to the Netherlands, we have Charles Andreas Brim, who spent the season on loan in the Eerste Division, which is the 2nd tier division of Dutch football. However, he was on loan from Sparta Rotterdam, who play in the top division, and also he did play 2 games in the Eredivisie, the top division of Dutch football this season. To Poland, we have Dominik Zator, who played in the top division, the Polish Ekstraklasa, with Korona Klise. Portugal, we have 2 players. Most notably is Steven Eustáquio, who plays for Porto and has been absolutely fantastic there, getting Champions League football this past season. In addition, there is Steven Vitória, who played for Chaves this season. They were newly promoted at the beginning of the season and ended up finishing 7th, with Steven Vitória scoring 7 goals for the club. So 2 solid performers in the Portuguese league. In Scotland, we also have 2 players, both who play in the Scottish Premiership. First is David Wotherspoon, who plays for St. Johnstone. He's been there basically his whole career. Second off, we have Victor Loturi, who just moved to Ross County prior to the 2022-2023 season. Loturi's Ross County finished 2nd last in the Scottish Premiership and had to win a promotion playoff to stay up in the top division, which they ended up doing. So just barely Victor Loturi stayed in the Scottish Premiership for next season. In Serbia, we have Milan Borjan, who of course is the keeper for Red Star Belgrade. However, Borjan was just told that he will no longer be the first choice keeper for Red Star Belgrade going into next season after spending the better part of half a decade as their starting keeper. There are rumblings that he could be moving to a team in the Slovakian division on loan, or he could be sticking around as a backup. Not really sure what's happening there just yet, but for right now, Borjan still is in Serbia. In Switzerland, we have Liam Miller, who played for FC Basel. Now, very interesting, this past season, Liam Miller was the last Canadian still active in European competition as FC Basel made it to the semi-finals of the Europa Conference League, and Liam Miller was on the team for that wild run. And finally, in the Turkish top flight, we have Sam Adekugbi, who spent this past season, well, the second half of this past season with Galatasaray on loan from Hatayspor, after Hatayspor unfortunately and tragically had the back half of their season closed off after those earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, but Adekugbi still playing in the Turkish top flight as of now. So there you have it, the the Canada national team roster breakdown for this Gold Cup. The fact that, while missing 5 crucial players who play abroad in Europe, we still have a team that the majority of guys play their football internationally and not in MLS, and not even for the Canadian teams in MLS. The fact that on a rotated Gold Cup squad, a squad missing 5 elite starters, on that squad we only have 4 guys from the Canadian MLS teams, and they're all guys who are like impact players, regular starters, regular impact players in MLS, is actually huge. The fact that we're at a point where, for even a team like 5 guys down with like 5 extra backup call-ups, we still are like regular starters who are important players on their teams in MLS, or guys who are playing like relatively high level, like top tier football in one of the top 20 footballing countries in Europe, or like second tier football in one of the top 7. That is such a high level compared to where we were 7-8 years ago. Like, it's incredible that in such a short period of time, the quality of league, like the quality of player that we're drawing from, is just so much higher than it was. This is definitely a very good Canada team. It is less rotated than the US's team from the Nations League, so that is a plus. It is still going to be interesting how this Canada team stacks up against the US or Mexico when we do end up playing them, and even against teams like Costa Rica or Panama if we end up playing teams like that in the Gold Cup. But this is a Canada team that, like, a final of a Gold Cup is very much possible with this squad. And so, like, I think definitely this team is making the semifinal. A final is very well in the realm of possibility. So that is for this video. As always, if you'd like to hit like, if you want to see more of my stuff, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.